all of a sudden the strawweight division feels like the bantamweight division of a couple of years ago, the women's bantamweight division, where you never really know what to expect, and the fights are pretty darn fun. There are two of them on the Fight Pass prelims on Saturday. Opening the card, which I'm a little surprised about, opening the card is Aisling Daly versus Randa Marcos, and then it's Jessica Rakoczy versus Valerie Letourneau. Nordine Taleb versus Chris Clements, the third Fight Pass fight. And then you got 4 Fox Sports 1 fights. Patrick Cote versus Joe Riggs is the headliner for the prelims. And then, of course, 5 pay-per-view fights. And one of the interesting fights on the main card involves Fabio Maldonado. He, of course, was supposed to fight Quinton Rampage Jackson. That fight not happening. Instead, he's fighting Steve Bosse, who Quebec fans know a whole lot about, a former minor league hockey player. Made it all the way to the UFC not that long ago, but then he retired after having to pull out of a fight last year prior to their show in Quebec City. He has been called upon to step up on short notice to replace Rampage against Fabio Maldonado. And now we have his manager, and a man who, if you have followed Canadian MMA, you have certainly heard of his name. You've seen him inside the octagon. You've seen his shows. A very important figure in the history of Canadian MMA. I've wanted to have this man on the show for quite some time. Happy that he is on this week prior to UFC 186 in Montreal. I'm talking about Stephane Patry, who joins us right now on the phone. Stephane, how are you?
I'm very good. What about yourself, Ariel?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for joining us. How did Steve Bosse get this fight? Because last I heard, he had retired from MMA.
Well, he had retired from MMA. He was actually training for a boxing fight in May, so he was in training camp. And then when the whole story about the injunction with Quinton Jackson came out publicly, Steve called me because I was going to handle himself his stuff for boxing and kickboxing and stuff like that. He didn't want to do MMA anymore because he was getting injured quite a lot doing wrestling and jiu-jitsu. So anyways, when the news broke, he called me. He goes, I want to fight Maldonado. So I immediately called the UFC. At first, they were not interested at all in putting Steve on the card because of what happened last year, where he retired before doing one fight on his deal with the UFC. So anyways, I insisted a little bit, and we ended up making a new deal for him. And there he is, fighting Maldonado Saturday.
Wow. So do you think if this opportunity doesn't come up, he never fights again in MMA?
It wasn't the plan at all. I'm being honest with you. I signed with Steve in March, and MMA wasn't part of the equation at all. And after the UFC agreed to give him that fight with Maldonado, he went back to the gym, to do MMA, Muay Thai, and all the other stuff. And the first thing he told me was, Jesus Christ, it's a good thing I took that. I'm in love with the sport again.
Huh.
So he's back in MMA full-time now. But, Steve's a warrior. He just needs a bit of fire in himself, and now he has the fire, and people will see a dangerous guy on the ring Saturday.
I remember when he announced his retirement that he said the injuries were catching up to him. He was just banged up. I mean, how does he feel physically now?
He feels good. I mean, actually, what happened was when he was training he signed the deal with the UFC back then. I wasn't involved in that deal, and then he started training. He was going to go to do a training camp in Thailand, and the week before he was supposed to leave for Thailand, he got hurt again. He had numerous shoulder injuries, elbow, knee. He got banged up pretty bad, and all the injuries were from training, never in a fight, always from training. So after the last injury, he decided not to go to Thailand and just retire. He was fed up of all the injuries. But then he started working. He started working with a physiotherapist because he played hockey last year in the North American Hockey League. So they worked on his shoulders. They worked on his elbows, everything, and now he's 100% healthy. He did some very, very hard sparring last week, and he's like a brand new one. So it's a big coincidence, but this coincidence ends up like the biggest news in his career, because his dream was to fight in the UFC, and there he is.
Yeah, and he gets to do it in Quebec. You mentioned that he played hockey as recently as last year. I know he used to be a hockey player, but he went back last year?
Yeah, he played for the Laval Predators. I think he played 16 games.
Okay.
With Laval. And and he was doing boxing training, and things were going better, no injuries. So that's how he ended up wanting to do a boxing fight, and then this UFC opportunity came. And if Maldonado was the guy with the injunction with Bellator, I don't think Steve would be fighting Jackson, because Jackson's a wrestler, But the fact that Maldonado is a striker, he's a boxer, it's the perfect opportunity for Steve to get back in the UFC, and then after that concentrate on wrestling and jiu-jitsu and all the other things that he hasn't been doing for the last couple of months.
So the Quebec MMA scene better than anyone. You've been promoting shows there for many, many years, over a decade. Of course, TKO. You were the one who really helped make MMA into a very popular sport over there. And I'm wondering, and we're going to talk about that in a second, but given your expertise and given your history of promoting shows in MMA, what's your take on UFC 186? As you know, fans have complained that it's not a great card, that it doesn't have a lot of roots in the Quebec scene, doesn't have connections to Montreal gyms and things of that nature. What's your take on this card that the UFC has brought to Montreal after not promoting a show in Canada for quite some time?
Well, I was surprised when they announced a show in April, because I thought they would do a show in Montreal with McDonald's fighting for the title. But they decided to put that on the July 11th card with McGregor and Aldo. So obviously this kind of hurts the Montreal card, because there's not really a marquee fighter fighting on the card that's from here. Obviously, with GSP on the sideline, that hurts them here in Montreal. But it's very complicated, because they didn't really have the time to build the guys like Aubin Mercier. Cote is, he's at the end of his career. Mm-hmm. So it's a complicated situation to come and do a big show like that in Montreal without a marquee fighter. But they decided to do it anyways. But and also I noticed there's a lot of people ever since we signed Bossy to fight on the card that are like they're freaking out. What? There's a UFC this weekend in Montreal? I didn't know.
Wow.
So the local promotion right now is not very good here. I don't know what that's all about, but a lot of people now are buying tickets because there are no Steve is fighting. But
how many tickets do you think he has sold or will sell by Saturday?
Oh, so Steve Bossy, without Steve Bossy, TKO was selling about 5,000 to 6,000 tickets. With Steve Bossy, we were selling between 8,000 and 9,000.
Wow.
The guy sells 2,000 to 3,000 tickets on a card, guaranteed. So, and that's another thing. People that know that Steve is fighting, it's because we're telling them. There's no advertising that Boss is fighting. So I don't know what their strategy is or what they're doing with that. But honestly, the local promotion that's going on in town right now is not as good as it used to be. So,
and what's your take on, because you don't promote anymore, right?
Not for now.
Not for now. Okay, we'll get to that. What's your take on the Canadian MMA scene right now? Because I've said on this show that it feels like a quiet time. We have Rory fighting for the belt, but with GSP leaving and with not as many shows here and the crowd's not as big, and honestly, not as many, I'm not talking about UFC shows. I'm talking about, the promotions that were cultivating this talent, like TKO, like MFC. It just doesn't feel like there's a lot of action going on in Canada these days. And I don't know why. And I want to ask you, given your expertise, why do you think things have changed over the last few years? Because at one point, it felt like so many guys were coming out of Canada. Even non-Canadians had to come through Canada to eventually make it in the UFC, if you know what I mean.
Well, honestly, it's very complicated. When I at the end of TKO, I think it was the last 11 shows were at the Bell Center, and we had amazing crowd from 5,000 to 9,000 people. It was good. And then when I stopped with TKO and came back 3 years later with Instinct, the first show was pretty good. We had like 5,000 people, but I spent a lot of money on advertising, on marketing, because it was a comeback show. It was the first Instinct event, so I wanted to really put a lot of money in advertising, and the result was 5,000 people. But then after that, when we did Instinct 2, 3, and 4, I went back to a normal advertising budget, and I had a hard time getting 2,000 people. I had and that brought me back to 2001 when I first started in 2000. When I first started in MMA, where we were struggling to build a fan base. We ended up doing it, but I wasn't. In 2012, you don't want to do again everything that you did back in 2000.
Right.
So I realized that the problem right now is, in the past, in the history, in the TKO era, going to an MMA event was an happening. It was something special. It was something, But now you have MMA 3 times a week on TV. You have The Ultimate Fighter. You have UFC on Fox. You have Bellator on Spike. And then you have UFC on RDS. You have World Series of Fighting on TSN. It's all over the place. So it's not the same thing anymore, where back then UFC wasn't on TV here. It was only on pay-per-view. The only show you had on TV here was TKO, and that was once a week. And I was using those once-a-week weekly shows to promote the event the week, the next month. So we had a pretty good gig going on. But right now, it's hard to take a guy out of his living room with his home theater in the living room and bring him to the Bell Center or to the arena, because he sees MMA on TV every day. So the market is different. We have, to bring back the TKO days here in Quebec, it's going to be very complicated. I tried it with Instinct, and I'll be honest, I failed. So it's not the same thing as it used to be. And there's also the fact that the people here in Quebec are still not, and you're going to kill me for saying this, but it's the truth. They're still not too excited by the ground game of MMA.
That's interesting. Because I think a lot of people would think that the Quebec fans are some of the most knowledgeable fans out there because they've seen so much. And people like myself who grew up in Quebec, I've been watching TKO. I remember watching, I have memories about TKO maybe even before, really the boom of the UFC after The Ultimate Fighter. So you hinted that you might be coming back. What were you trying to say there?
Well, I'm actually I've been working under the radar for the last 3 years with the Quebec government to get full contact kickboxing and Muay Thai legalized in Quebec. I actually have a big meeting tomorrow with the government, and I'm on the verge of making it happen. And once I do, I'll start a promotion here that's going to be a bit like Glory, but with elbows.
Oh, interesting. And that's illegal in Quebec?
It is illegal. Right now it's illegal in Quebec, yeah.
And what's it like dealing with that commission? Because, they have received criticism as well.
Well, the thing is, it's not even the commission. I met with the commissioner a few times about it. He wants to do it, but the thing is, the way they structured combat sports in Quebec, and it's not only MMA, it's also boxing. The way they structured it, combat sports in Quebec are not a rule. There's no rules. It's a law. So just to change one word in a law is very complicated. It has to go to the Prime Minister. It's a big headache. So I kind of found some holes in the game, and that's what I'm working on right now to get it sanctioned.
And you feel like that will be bigger than trying to bring back a new TKO or something like that?
Oh yeah, guaranteed.
Really? Wow, that is interesting.
Yeah.
Now, you also work for RDS as a pundit, as an analyst, and not too long ago, you went out on the record and said that GSP is coming back. And Dana White said recently that they offered him a fight on this card. He turned it down, and right now it seems like as time passes, Dana White is less confident that he will ever fight again. Do you still feel like he will come back? Do you still stick to your guns on that one?
Yeah, Dana should be confident because George is going to come back for one fight. I'm not saying he's going to come back and go on a title run and do 10 fights, but I know for sure he's going to come back for one fight.
Really? And do you have any idea when this will happen?
I have no idea. If I knew, if I had the answer, I'm pretty sure Dana and Lorenzo would have the answer as well. But it's one of those things where George got injured, which is something that wasn't expected. Is other knee injury. Then Anderson Silva got caught with steroids. So I mean, there's a lot of things that have happened in the past few months that can change the scenario a little bit. But I know that George has the will, and he wants to do one more fight. He doesn't want to leave the sport with that fight with Hendricks.
Really?
I know that for a fact.
Because he's done something so rare. He left as champion, and now with the times changing, and he keeps talking about the drug testing, I kind of feel like he's gonna sit it out. There's no point in doing it all over again. But you still feel 100% that he will come back at least one more time?
I still feel 100% that he's going to come back for at least one fight. To me, it's obvious.
Why? Why obvious?
I mean, it's obvious because you have to know the guy. George is a special guy. There's something in himself. He has to come back for one fight, and it's not Stephane saying that. It's the way I see it.
But I'm assuming people are telling you this, right? This is not your guess.
No, it's not a guess.
Okay.
I'm telling you, he's going to come back for one fight. But the thing is, if George would ask me, "What's your opinion? Should I come back for one fight?" I would say absolutely not. You've done so much for the sport. You've done so much for the UFC. You've done everything. There might be nobody else that will do what you did. So, just enjoy life. And there's so many opportunities for him outside of fighting right now. But I know he's going to come back for one fight. Even though I tell him that, his dad tells him that, his new manager tells him that, it's not going to change. He's going to come back for one fight. He's stubborn. And he's going to come back for one fight.
Are you surprised that he didn't accept the fight on this card because it was in Montreal and, it would have been a huge deal?
Well, when I say George is coming back for one fight, it means he's going to come back for that one fight everybody wants to see. And obviously, when I say that, everybody points out to Anderson Silva. And, if he was going to fight on that card in Montreal Saturday, obviously the opponent that Dana would have offered is not Anderson Silva.
Mm-hmm.
So he just doesn't want to come back for one fight that's not going to mean much in the history of mixed martial arts. He wants to make history with that one fight. Obviously, like I said before, with what happened with Anderson in his last fight and his problems with the commission, I don't know what the big plan will be now. But obviously, the possibility of doing Anderson might be a bit more tricky right now.
What's your relationship, if any, with GSP now? Do you still have any kind of relationship with him?
I talk to him once in a while. Obviously, we don't have the same relationship we used to have. For years, for 7 years, we were the best friends. We were together every day. So the relation has changed, but I still talk to him.
And so, because correct me if I'm wrong, did you kind of end your business relationship on bad terms, and have you had to work to repair that relationship? How would you describe how it ended?
It didn't end good. Obviously, After he lost to Matt Serra, George wanted to fire one of his coaches the day after, and I didn't agree with it because, I knew that George didn't train for that fight. George was partying all the time for that fight with Serra. He didn't do a real training camp for that fight. So basically, I was telling George, you can fire him. You can fire him if you're not comfortable with him anymore. Yes, you do fire him, but you can't do it now, because if you do it now, people will say, "Oh, he lost because of this guy." You see, he just fired him. So to be honest with Victor, the name of the trainer was Victor. Wait a little bit before you take your decision or announce your decision. So that was our first disagreement ever in our professional life and our friendship. There was a big fight around this whole Victor thing.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, things got worse and worse and worse, and then he ended up telling me he didn't want me to manage him anymore. So, which, it's his decision, and even though we had a contract, it's his call. So we went that way. But the problem was George had just signed a new 6-fight deal with the UFC that I negotiated. So there was no way the new manager, Sherry Spencer, was going to get her commission on fights I negotiated, right? So we ended up, I had to sue him. We were going to go to court. It took like a year and a half before we got a court date. And the day before the court date, his lawyer called my lawyer, said, let's settle out of court. So we ended up settling out of court. I was very angry at George for that all 2 years. I didn't talk to him for that period of time. Between 2007 and 2009, I didn't talk to him once.
Wow.
And then in end of 2009, beginning of 2010, we talked to each other. We went to dinner, and we kind of put everything behind us. And but obviously the relation will never be the same. But I mean, it's part of life.
Was it hard for you to see him become this megastar afterwards and really become one of the greatest of all time when you kind of helped him, get to where he was in the UFC? I mean, you got him to that title fight and defending that belt at one time. Was that hard for you?
No, I was very happy. Honestly, I was very happy for him. But at the same time, I know how George is. George is he listens to people a lot. He listens to people way too much. I remember, I'll give you a stupid example. I think it was when he fought Frank Trigg. When he fought Frank Trigg, we were in Vegas at the restaurant a couple of days before the fight, maybe 4 days before the fight. And there was me, George, and one of his trainers. And then all of a sudden, the waitress comes up to take our order. And she goes, "Oh, you're George St-Pierre. Oh, you're fighting Frank Trigg. I know him very well. My brother used to wrestle in high school." And she starts giving George advice on his game plan. She's a waitress. And then she leaves, and George is all thinking about what she said. He's actually thinking about what the waitress just said.
Wow.
And we had to work very hard to get all the
thoughts,
the stupid things. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It was like he was actually thinking she might be right, but she wasn't. It was just whatever she was saying didn't make any sense. But it made him think. That's the way George is. It doesn't make him, but that's the way he is. And he's still like this. He's still this way today with everything. If you put something in his head, he's going to think about it for days. That's the way he is.
Fascinating insight.
So back to your question, I wasn't mad at him, but because I knew that so many people put so many things in his head that the kid that I discovered back in 2001 is still the same. When he's in the ring, he's that same kid all the time. So I wasn't.
Well, Stephane, a great pleasure to have you on the show. This was a lot of fun. I wish you and Steve the best on Saturday. I know, as I've said before, the card isn't what a lot of Montrealers wanted, but for me personally, it's always great to come back home, and there are some great Canadian stories on the card, and Steve is definitely one of them.
And there's two fights that, for me, the fight of the night will be either Maldonado against Steve or Campbell against Magdessy. So you have two huge fights on that main card, and then obviously the world title. But Bossé and Maldonado and Magdessy Campbell, those two fights, those are worth the price of the ticket alone.
We look forward to it. Thank you so much for the time, and good luck in that meeting tomorrow with the Quebec government.
Thank you, Ariel.
All right, there he is, Stephane Patry. If you're in the Quebec area, he is an analyst for RDS, Réseau de Sport, the sports network, which is the French equivalent, the sister channel for TSN, the ESPN of Canada. He does a lot of great analyst work for that network, and of course still very much tied to the world of mixed martial arts in Quebec. Great insight from him. We appreciate the time very much.